welcome to you, Nick, my first guest. Today we're going to be talking about spirituality and how your spirituality looks, your practice looks, but also how, our generation is thinking about spirituality and our practices as a generation. So let's get into it. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, just say what you do in general.
I go by Nic Porter, and in terms of spirituality, I've been practicing it for almost 10 years now. I don't know why I started, but one day I was in my family's house in the basement. I was just by myself. And then all of a sudden I got this urge to just sit with myself in a chair. I closed my eyes and I felt this wave of peace flow over me. And I still don't quite understand why I did that to begin with. But it's the feeling of that has stuck with me my whole life. So I've spent the rest of my time trying to understand what that is and trying to be able to do it like automatically and like teach other people how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old were you when you did that? And how long did you just sit there?
I was 15 when I first did that. It's probably like 10 minutes. Yeah.
That's cool. How would you define spirituality?
How would I define it? If you're able to pay attention to something that is beyond the individual boundaries of your mind and body, I would call that spirituality. It's like, how do you know that you're listening to silence? I can't really describe it, but it's when you know you hit it. It's I guess you see the side effects of it, like the peace of it, the bliss of it, the sense of understanding you have about yourself and the people around you. You feel this sense of like your life is like complete. There's nothing else for you to do.
Really interesting.
I've had many moments like when I was by myself, like this is it. Like my life is like it's done. There's like nothing else for me to do.
Really?
So sometimes I just sit with myself like, what am I doing? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? But that's why I like doing stuff like this, because I can teach it.
Yeah.
And I still have a lot of, God willing, like I still have a lot of life left to live.
Yeah.
So
That's really interesting. We're gonna get back to like the fulfillment of it and like what the outcomes have been for you. But you talking about like how do you know you're listening to silence? It reminded me of a quote or a topic my friend was talking about. She was like, how do you know when you're sleeping? It's like I can give you all of the tools to sleep, but like when do you know you're asleep?
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, like, what do your practices look like in the day to day? Like, what are you practically doing? Like, you like waking up and you're meditating now? Are you, I don't know, like crystals we were talking about earlier? Are you into the crystals? I know you mentioned Reiki. You did Reiki and how that kind of connects. Like, what is your daily practice, and like, what are other practices you want to kind of explore and get into?
So the main practice, the cornerstone of what I do is meditation. And essentially that is me sitting down in a cross-legged position and just closing my eyes and focusing on the stillness.
Do you put your hands out? Do you like have the,
I do that sometimes.
The situation?
Yeah, I do that. I do that sometimes.
Okay.
I don't think that's necessary, but I mean, you could use that as a tool, because if you lift your hands in this direction, your breathing pattern goes more upwards to your sternum.
Interesting.
And when you move it towards this way, your breathing goes more towards your abdomen.
Interesting. So you kind of decide where you're holding your hands in order to like decide about the breathing. Okay.
Yeah. And there's different effects with like both. So I guess it just depends which one you prefer.
Okay. So you're waking up in the morning and you're like, okay, I'm going to start my day. with meditation? Are you meditating for 30 minutes, an hour? How long are you doing that for?
It's like, as long as I feel like I need to.
Okay.
I don't have a set time. But if I know I have things to do that day,
Yeah.
I use it as a way to center myself and feel the bliss of whatever. I don't know what to call it. The source, or there's so many names for it. So if you feel the bliss of that and you feel the peace of it,
Yeah.
and you feel like your mind is well ordered,
Yeah.
then that's when I know I can get up and start my day.
I see. So you
Yeah.
kind of wait for that moment to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of sit in that.
Do you then come back later? Do you have like a midday snack kind of deal? Or like an evening, like, like kind of washing off of the day and you go into it? Or
So after I do the initial practice, I'm always feeling the effects of it throughout my day.
yeah.
So I'm always in this state of meditation, but I'm not necessarily closing my eyes.
Okay.
But there are times, like if I have a moment to myself, I will close my eyes and just recenter myself.
Okay.
Before I go to sleep, I'll meditate.
Okay.
But people are always trying to get into that state, but they're not conscious of it. Like, for example, people who watch TV, essentially, if you're not watching TV yourself and you're looking at someone watch TV, you see that they're very relaxed.
Yeah.
And they're sitting down and they're staring at one point
Yeah.
in space, which is like the TV screen.
Yeah.
And while they're doing that, they are suspending their own thought process for someone else's. So they're in this state of listening for maybe hours. Like you watch a movie, you're listening for hours. Like your mind may move when you want to react to something in the movie, but for a large part, you're very still. So if you're able to be aware of the stillness and do it yourself
Yeah.
without the external stimulus of like media or movies or conversation, then you're able to meditate.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. So you try to maintain that throughout the day, that stillness that
Yeah.
you create in the morning. That's cool. Okay, let's get into it. Crystals and tarot cards and palm reading and whatever else is out there, talking to the dead. Where do you draw the line? Do you and Reiki, we talked about like what is like your limit and your perception, ideas, belief about all of these things, and why have you not incorporated into your practice, or why have you? And drugs. Drugs is a good one as well.
I've tried all these things.
You've tried all of these things.
Just to put it out there. Just to see if they work. Like, how do they work?
Yeah, exactly.
And there is a benefit to all of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're like keys to open a certain door.
Okay.
And once you walk through the door, the key is useless. So if you're able to, for example, I did a Reiki healing session and I had certain like energetic blocks in my system because of like various situations in my life. And before and after, there was a clear difference in terms of my ability to tap into that, the non-physical aspect, the energy, the subtle feeling I get when I meditate. But if you come back to rely on that every time, then you're going to be stuck there.
Okay.
And a lot of those practices, they have to do with enhancing you as an individual, as opposed to you being able to pay attention to something that is more universal. And the only way you can do that is really you have to go into your own system and be able to navigate through everything, like your thoughts, your feelings, the system that was like given to us.
I see. So you're
Yeah.
saying, like, kind of all of these other alternative spiritual practices are all leading to the same place ultimately.
They are, but they're all limited.
They're all limited.
Because the reason why they're limited is because they are systems that were created like by us. And the system, the system of the body and the mind, like there's no way we made that.
Yeah.
It's like it's more advanced than we could ever
Create.
And because it's so beyond our ability to understand, we can never make something that's as precise or as accurate as something that could free you from whatever you're trying to be free of.
I see. So you're saying, like, of all of the tools that we have and all of the routes that we could take to get to this place, you know, of peace, serenity, and all that stuff, the body is your best bet.
That's where you start.
That's where you start. So thinking about the body, if we're talking about drugs, right? Like hallucinogens, all of these things open your mind, right? To a greater degree. And so do you think there is benefit in using the tool of something like marijuana, psilocybin, all of these things to like get your body to a place where you can do that more, like have a greater connection to yourself or like unblock, you know, more things?
I do think plants have a way of loosening your psychological structure up enough for you to be able to see that door. But it's not permanent. Like it'll take you there and then it'll kick you off the mountain. And that's why people like crash after they do all that stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're able to go up the mountain like the right way, through the right door, the right system, then you can stay there. And you don't have to use any drugs.
I see.
Yeah.
So you believe it's possible to get to the place where drugs take you without drugs?
Of course. You go further without.
Further without?
Yeah, yeah.
Have you had an experience where you went further than drugs? Because drugs will take you far.
Well, I mean, I haven't like done crazy stuff. But I did have this one experience when I was sitting down and for some reason I wanted like absolute silence. I don't know why. But I was sitting down, I had my headphones on because it's trying to block everything out. I closed my eyes. And there was this one moment where every single thing disappeared. Like my senses, the sensation of my body, my thoughts, like the world, everything was just completely gone. It only happened for a second. And I was not under the influence of like any man-made thing. I was just my own system. And ever since I had that experience, I'm like, this is the way. Do this. There's not anything else. Will not help. I mean, it can point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the way it works is you got to go through yourself. That's all.
Through yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So even though like plants aren't man-made, you still think it's just a key and not the final destination.
Let me not say man-made. Let me say a substance that is outside of your body,
Okay.
the system. And whatever you use that's outside of your system that you have to consume, like everything we consume, it comes into our bodies and it comes out. It flows in and out, in and out, in and out. But if you're able to use your consciousness, which is something that's always here it doesn't come and go, come and go. It's like constant with you all the time. If you're able to use that to free yourself, then you'll have like a permanent experience of feeling free. Yeah.
I see what you're saying. That's interesting. That's a really good point about everything you consume goes in and out, like it does exit, versus your consciousness, which is constant. Where does God play in all this stuff? The idea of God, the universe, connection to the universe, connection to God. What are you doing? Do you feel connected to something greater? Do you engage with the greaterness or the thing that is like outside you in a more religious way? Like, would you say the state was created by God?
Yeah, it's definitely something I didn't make.
Okay.
Yeah. It's something that's already here.
Okay.
It's here all the time. But are you aware of it or not? That's the question. If you contextualize yourself as an ego in the world, then you could ask the question, like, how do I connect with God? But if you're able to suspend your psychological process for long enough, then the language of I and God, it doesn't exist. So it's hard to even ask that question. I mean, all of religion is a story. And these stories have to be created with language. And language is a logical system. It's in time. So you have to separate things through language. Like, this is a chair, these are pants, this is a microphone. It chops everything up. And like, this is the nature of the intellect, which is like a knife. It cuts everything up. And because religion and stories is like the way most people have studied it as like an intellectual concept. So it puts you in a certain context of division. And that's why I said, if you say, how do I connect with God? The sentence puts you in that division already. But if you're able to go beyond your intellect and like observe it, you see that it's it only helps you get to a certain point. But if you go beyond that, you have this experience that's beyond something that you can describe. So it's difficult.
What I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the proper way to say this in a sentence would be, I am God. God is me. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't use that word.
Okay.
It's the wrong word, because that can come off as like very arrogant.
Yeah.
To a lot of people. Let's use the word source instead.
Okay.
Or foundation. Everything has the same foundation that we see, which means the same foundation is also here. And if you go deep enough into your system, you will see that if everything is connected, which it is, then I must not be anything that appears to be separate. So I have to be that foundation. Like, what else could I be? And a lot of people have used the word God as the foundation. Like, it's in a lot of scriptures, like, God is my rock, all these things. It's just it's difficult to speak about, because it's the experience is illogical.
Yeah.
And we only have a certain the language that we have and the context of the language, it makes people think certain things about what it is I'm saying.
Yeah.
And people have been killed for saying stuff like this. If you have the experience yourself,
Yeah.
then I think you'll be able to see what I'm talking about.
Have you ever gotten a naysayer, someone who didn't believe, to engage in these practices or have this experience, and they came out on the other side being transformed or becoming a believer of this?
I would say no, because this is not something that you believe. It's something that you can experience. Like for me, belief is you need to use the tool of language to believe in something. It's a certain psychological system. But do you believe you have a foot?
Wow. That's deep, Nick. That's wow.
That's what it is, yeah.
That's a great way to explain that. It just is.
It's just there. It's just there. And that's like the things that I'm speaking of is not something that I thought one day, like, let me just say all this stuff so I can piss people off.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
And I'm not. I'm just like, I'm just digging inside of myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, look, this is what's here.
Yeah.
And I don't see anything else. If someone can come to me, have a conversation with me, and lead me somewhere different and say, this is what's happening, I'll be like, okay, you got it. But I have not met anyone who's been able to tell me different.
To tell you different than where you've been going.
But I'm very open to it. Very open to it. But I've talked to people about this kind of experience before, and it's interesting. But to understand, you have to experience it. You have to let a lot of things go that have been conditioned upon us since childhood, and a lot of people are not willing to let that go.
Yeah. You mentioned language as one thing you essentially have to let go. You mentioned intellect as something you have to let go because of its divisive nature. You mentioned ego, which you have to let go. A lot of things got to go out the window. What else? Like, what else do I need to be letting go in order to experience this?
I mean, it comes down to your sense of being an individual,
Okay.
your identity.
Okay.
And in this time period in the human kingdom, a lot of people are attached to their identity, which begins with the body,
Yeah.
because we're told at an early age, we're told that someone points to your body and like, this is Gabriella.
Yeah.
And then you look in the mirror and say, I'm Gabriella. And you do that thousands, millions of times. And then you just forget that you're not actually, well, you don't forget. It's like no one told you. Or you haven't looked deep enough to understand that you're not actually the figure that you see before you. So if you identify with your body first, then you start to identify with what your body does in the world, which is a lot of people, it's your occupation or who you are to other people, like a sister or a brother. But for a lot of people first, it's their gender. I would say I'm a man. And men do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you might say you're a woman, and women do this kind of stuff. But what I'm speaking of goes beyond even that. And if I am very brutally honest with myself, I would not say I'm a man. I would say, if I could use any word, I would just say I'm a spirit. But even that's not correct because that's just another word. Because we're thrown into this experience and no one is like, nobody knows what's going on.
Facts.
Nobody knows what's going on. We're thrown into it. So we need something because the mind is always running.
Yeah.
The mind is always running. And it needs something to ground itself. So our culture has come up with the idea, which works mostly. It's kind of failing recently, but it's been working of like having this this psychological identity, and like people of cultures of the past, they would identify with occupations, like I said, like that you would come from a family of like cobblers or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you'd be in the world and say like, I'm a cobbler.
Yeah.
So you wake up, you think about being a cobbler, you do cobbler things. I'm a cobbler. So that gave people a lot of stability for a long time.
Yeah.
But because the internet is coming out, people's identities are being shattered all over the place. These identities that we have, they're not as strong as we think. But if you lean on something that is beyond, if you lean on something that created the identity in the first place,
Yeah.
then you would be able to
So
have stability.
you don't feel lost. Going back to this idea of existential stability, you feel greater stability leaning on this source and foundation than you do opting for the man-made identities. How did you bypass the existential crisis that is letting go of all of the identities that we've been given?
And that's a great question because I don't know. I really don't. Even to this day, I'm like, how was I able to go through all of these holes and these roles? I have no idea.
Yeah, like to be able to sit here and be like, the statement "I am not a man" does not even resonate. It's like you have passed through levels that most people,
Yeah.
are still navigating.
I don't know. I don't know. It's like,
That's the key to the universe, Nick. You're supposed to give us the answer.
I wish I could. I still think like when I told you at the beginning,
Yeah.
when I sat down, 15 years old, I was like, just started to meditate. And I still don't know why I did that. But even before that, because my family is into the church. But like, let me make a disclaimer. Like, I have nothing against people who do that. Like, I love it. It's great. I think it helps a lot of people. But for me, when I was really young, I asked the question, okay, they say God made all this stuff. God made me, God made you, God made the birds and the bees, everything. Okay, but where did God come from? That was my question. And no one around me could really answer it. So I asked myself, where did God come from? So I kept thinking and thinking and thinking. And then I reached this blank place in my mind. And I was like, is this the end of my mind? Like, what just happened? There's no more sound, no more thinking. And looking back on it, that was the first step to bring me to the practice of meditation. But at the time, I didn't know that's what that was. And that space of emptiness is that's like where I live. So I get caught, of course, especially with romance. I get caught with romance. But largely the chaos of people's minds, I really don't get caught in it. Yeah.
Romance. Well, let's go to romance.
I'm still trying to figure that out.
You get caught in romance. Who are you? And I don't know if this is like the appropriate question to ask, considering you have like such an integration of your practice, but who are you apart from your spirituality, and how does it play out in your relationships to others?
That's a good question. I haven't been perfect with practicing that in relationships because I've come to understand that yes, there's a spiritual aspect to my life that's very apparent. There's also a shadow aspect to myself too, that's psychological, and that has to do with like traumas and like just another disclaimer. Just because I'm aware of all these things doesn't mean I'm not subject to human experiences. So in relationships, I've come to understand that a lot of the shadow, it comes out in romance, and because a lot of romance, if you don't handle it right, if you're not careful with it, you can actually be influenced by a lot of the desires of the body in terms of like just pleasure, wanting pleasure from the other person, like trying to extract pleasure from the other person.
Yeah.
And I've definitely messed up on that, for sure. Most women who I've met who say they're into spirituality, they don't meditate. For a lot of people, it's a show. It's because even before he was
Yeah.
he was saying, "Oh, we're gonna talk about spirituality." I was imagining someone like Russell Brand. It's like long hair and beads and tattoos and gems and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's just missing the point. Like I understand that if you want to express yourself like that, I totally get it, and I like the aesthetic of it. But there's a difference between the aesthetic of something and the actual practice
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. What has been the biggest complaints, either from partners or family members, friends, strangers, the biggest complaint of engaging with you
Oh man.
in this like spiritual way?
The main struggle with me, not only in romance, but just with everyone, is like me not acknowledging their context. But that is the only way for you to connect with someone. And then if you're able to experience their context for a while, then they may or may not, they might ask you about your context.
Yeah.
And then you can tell them. But for a while, I was like, this is not real. This is not real. You need to see things this way. Like, what are you doing? You're like wasting your time on all these like very trivial things. But as I get older and I become more empathetic, I'm like, wow, I really like, I really like hurt a lot of people's feelings because I wasn't taking their experience seriously. And that's actually one of the dangers of getting too deep into spirituality,
Yeah.
because you can become someone who can help people who are willing to get there to that experience. But if you're just the average person on the street and someone's complaining about their boss told them something that they didn't like, it is not going to help if I tell someone that wasn't that didn't happen. It's just not helpful at all. Yeah, and that's a hard lesson I've had to learn. Like, there's been a few women in my life that have had to like, beat me over the head with that lesson. Like my mom included, my dad included. There would be times when I would do something that's like not that big of a deal to me, and I would get this huge backlash. And then because I'm in this meditative state, I'm kind of like looking at them like I'm not reacting to them at all, and that makes them even more upset. So there are a lot of benefits of being aware of the spirit, but there's also a lot of things that may or may not hurt you in like being in society, which is why a lot of people, they become really spiritual, like they grow their hair out, they live in the woods, all that kind of stuff. Because our culture is not really designed to have like a pristine like spiritual process. So, but like I'm getting more empathetic, and I'm like making more friends and stuff. So
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. That's a good point, because you could very quickly go to that kind of left field individuality situation. That's a good point. What is your two-part question, going back to the fulfillment aspect and what you've been getting out of this, and going to your pitch for people who are interested in it or like want to test the waters experience? What is the benefits you've seen doing this? And like, how would you sell it to someone? Like this is, the way, the truth, and the light. Like, how, like.
So first, I would ask them, like, what has been troubling you with just life, just anything. And then they would say, anyone can say anything about something. But at the end of the day, they would say something that's like troubling their mind with something. So if I were to empathize with how they're feeling, like repeat back to them, like, this is what you meant by that. They could say, yes, this is the problem. Then I would say, well, there's a way you don't have to deal with that anymore, right? And they might perk up. Their ears might perk up. And I would say, well, if you learn how to meditate, if you learn how to suspend your mind for even 5 minutes, you will be able to see not only that one situation that's troubling you in a larger context, but you'll be able to see your entire life in a larger context, which will help you solve not only that problem, but the next problem and the next problem and other people's problems. So it's a way for you to become more intelligent, which I think is, I think that's a huge selling point for a lot of people. Like, who doesn't want to be smarter?
That's true.
Yeah.
What would you say to people who, for lack of a better term, are addicted to their humanity and the very emotional experience that comes with being human? Like, I'm falling in love, and then I go through a breakup, and then, I get my dream job, and then I'm fired, and just, what would you say to someone who's afraid of leveling out all of those up and downs of our chaotic life?
I'll probably say maybe you're not ready for it yet, because I'm not gonna take someone off the roller coaster if they like the roller coaster.
Yeah,
It's not my job. That's not my desire to do that. But if people are going through stuff, like I'm living side by side with someone, and if someone asks me, like, look, we're going through like the same situation, and I'm going through all this stuff, and you seem to be fine, like, what about you is different? Then I could be like, okay, then I'll tell you. But in the past, like I said, I would be like, you're going through this because you're not doing this right.
Yeah.
You're not doing this right. And they would never listen. And I'm not gonna beat you over the head if you don't want to to go beyond it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this life, this decision, is it lonely?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Very lonely. But I guess I've made quote unquote friends with the spirit or like the energy that makes me feel whole and peaceful. So if you're on this path, you will definitely find that you need a lot less social interaction to be stable. Because a lot of people use their social networks to stabilize their mind. Because a lot of people, like I said, they're a social identity. So if you take like someone who's very popular in school, like the popular girl, everyone wants to be her, all that kind of stuff. If you take the same girl and you put her on an island behind with herself, who's gonna tell her she's cute and pretty? Like she lives for that. For someone who doesn't live for that, you don't have to be around people to validate who you are and how you feel. Yes, you're gonna be probably walking around in the world by yourself for quite a while, unless you find someone else who's like that too.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I've noticed people who are like that, they don't mind if you come or go. So you might meet them, you might have a great time with them, but you might not hear from them for like months because they're not like reaching out to you and stuff. They're like, I don't care. But most of my, like, since I left my parents' house several years ago, most of my time is spent alone. Like 80%, 85% of my time is spent by myself. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like, I mean, I don't think my thoughts are abstract or left field or all that kind of stuff. But that's why most people tell me like you're different or abstract, all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I think it's similar to animals or creatures that evolve on an island. They're way different from the creatures that were on the mainland because they're not being influenced by the behaviors of the
Yeah. The mainlanders. Yeah.
the general species.
Yeah. And we'll wrap up here with these last few questions. You have the desire to have a family.
Yeah.
And that speaks to your humanity versus your spirituality. So, like, how have you come to the decision of, wanting to have a family versus wanting to go live in the wilderness, grow your hair long and be one with nature?
But the more I get older and the stronger I feel like I become in the spirit, the more I grow into what it means to be a man. The more I understand that I feel like, I mean, when I look around, I don't see many men like me walking around. And I feel like I could be of great use to society and a family, and a woman, children. And I think if I'm able to raise a family that has these kinds of principles, I feel like it could positively impact who knows how many people.
So with that, you rather stay connected to humanity.
Yeah, I want to stay connected to humanity. Like there's different kinds of I want to say I'm a yogi. Let me just put that out there because that would be like kind of arrogant for me to say that. But there's yogis who become enlightened, and there's two kinds of yogis. There's ones that reach the peak and they go off by themselves, and they exist with the bliss for the rest of their lives. And people go up to them, they find them. They don't go looking for people. That's one way to live your life. But then there's other people, they become enlightened, and they look back at where they came from and it's like, wow, all these people need help. So they go back and they start teaching people. They start having like satsangs, and they might raise a family, have a kid. And that's the kind of yogi I would like to be. I'm not saying I'm a yogi right now, but it does seem like I'm on that path to live that kind of life.
All right. Well, we are at time.
All
So
right.
this was absolutely great. This
Yeah.
was such a
Yeah.
just phenomenal conversation.
I don't know if it was or not. I'm just like, things are just falling out of my mouth.
No, I think it was fantastic. Before we go, tell everybody where we can find you, Nick.
Okay.
How we can keep up with your work. How we can connect.
Okay, so beyond all this talk about spirituality, I do photography and music. I produce, mix, and master. I want to get into teaching meditation, but you can find me on Instagram at Nic Porter, which is NICXPORTER. And I have a website. There's a link in my bio. And on Twitter, I post like insights that I have that may not make sense to people.